Welcome to the Peleneros Taylor and Martin Seif show, Capitals Uncovered. It covers geopolitics, and we've got a returning guest, a friend, Professor Emeritus at American University of Paris, a poet, and a geopolitical analyst and writer, historian, and all that. Martin
Right.
Hall, you've just
Yeah.
been very, very busy completing the final tech parts, chapters, or whatever, of your
I
latest
cut
book about
40,000 words out in
geopolitics.
1 minute.
We talked a little bit. I'm gonna hit you with a couple of questions, so you don't have to go through the process of explaining what the book is about. Just give us the
Okay.
title and tell us when it'll be out. It's published by Bloomsbury.
Right. American Myopia, the failure of U.S. global strategy, and the risks of major power war. And it should be out in the fall.
Right. Aren't you worried that these things are going to become out of date?
No,
No.
no, because I'm tracing the dynamics of major power rivalries, and
Yes.
these things don't change
Yeah, sure.
overnight. And the
Nothing beyond the
idea
sun.
you're going to make peace with Russia in 24 hours has already been proven to be a farce.
Right.
So,
Well,
I'm not worried about it at all. And in fact, I do argue for a path towards peace at the end, but just outline, I just general sketch. In my view, we won't be able to reach peace unless we start working with China primarily, but other powers as well, in forming a concerted relationship to end the regional conflicts, Russia, Ukraine, and Iran and Israel, with the U.S. and they're involved as well. But what I'm saying here is we're right now in a two-front war, and the real danger is it will move to a three-front war if China and Taiwan and North and South Korea begin to become a little more, let's say,
mm.
more aggressive, or the tensions grow in that region, which they are growing. Um, and we've even got
Hall,
India and Pakistan. Yeah, but go
I'm
ahead.
just going to hit you with the guest we had yesterday.
Okay,
He's a maximalist pro-Trumpist. So
okay.
I'll just hit you. Trump is still playing 5D chess. He's a negotiator. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's not demented. He's throwing a few spanners in there. Ukraine has killed far more Russians and vice versa, and they've just put a robot army into the field. Um,
Mhm.
there wasn't ever going to be a ground war but the point is that the Americans have got the Albertan and Venezuelan oil for themselves,
Mhm.
and they've cut off the Strait of Hormuz, and they've also just struck a deal with the Indonesians to cut off the Strait
Mhm.
of Malacca. So if it comes to the crunch, they'll be able to. They've got two choke points against the Chinese, and the Chinese are desperate. The Iranians are
Mhm.
desperate because they didn't have a lot of oil left either, even though they're oil producing for some reason or other. So America's winning this. So it's not a American myopia; it's American excellent planning. What do you say about that?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a dream. I'll put it mildly, diplomatically. First of all, one of the more dangerous things. Remember, Fire and Fury, I guess it was his whole peace through strength routine with Kim, which he called the Rocket Man. That peninsula is much more tense than Trump went to visit Kim with John Bolton's pseudo advice and ended up with a much more tense sense on the peninsula. And it's even more dangerous because Russia has a military alliance with North Korea. And they can play that. It's a card. That's a strategic card that they can play against the Americans if they begin to lose in the Ukraine or where have you. Now, I'm not denying that some of the things that Trump is doing as a counter are not some sort of grand strategy. However, he's got a counter strategy. There's a counter strategy going on, and in my view, the cards are more in the Russian, Chinese, and Iranian hands. Now,
Yes.
what else is happening here is that the Russians, because of this attack on Iran, which hasn't, whose military capabilities, as far as I understand it, have not been as destroyed as Trump has, and they've come up with the control of the Strait Hormuz, which is what everybody warned for I don't know how many years that they would do if ever attacked. Um, this is going to put Russia and China closer together. And why? Because the one hand, Russia will have to finish the Siberian to oil connection. They'll make more land routes to supply Iran. My understanding is that Israel struck one of the train routes that brings in Chinese Chinese products to Iran, and therefore we're creating a land versus sea warfare. And I understand that Trump wants perhaps he could control the Straits of Malacca or whatever if there's a crisis, but I think these land powers can do us more damage than he's believing, and that Russia and Ukraine is a stalemate. I mean, it's whether Russia can. There's certainly much loss, and that provides hope not for more conflict, but hope that those two powers will come to a realization that they can achieve peace. So my view is that we have to work towards diplomacy. All these grand schemes of controlling the Straits of Malacca, whatever, aren't going to work unless we begin to work with the other powers, particularly China, and try to calm these different crises down. China has shown a willingness to try to appease the situation between Russia and Ukraine, as well as between Israel and Iran. It seems to me we should work with them as best we can, um,
I
and
guess
at the same time protect Taiwan in working with China, so that doesn't become the next focal point. And to my knowledge, Trump is doing nothing to appease tensions, find a way to compromise between China and Taiwan. I mean, if Taiwan becomes independent, who's responsible for it? The Americans. We need to find a deal with China that protects Chinese interests as well as Taiwanese interests. And I really think that's possible. And I think that's precisely what Trump should be doing now instead of preparing for the Straits of Malacca. They're also going to be deploying intermediate range missiles in the Philippines. That's not going to get the Chinese very happy. And either are the intermediate range missiles that are supposed to be deployed in Germany next year.
Well, he's
Or
called for a
something.
massive increase in the defense budget, hasn't he? I mean, he's really turned out to be a war president, a military president. Is he going to get that through Congress? Can America afford it?
Irony, I critique that as one of the reasons why I couldn't support Trump as a peace president in my first book, World War Trump. And the irony is Biden actually boosted the military spending more than Trump did, and Congress even pushed it more than Biden wanted. So we have a Congress of hawks there who don't really see that by spending so much, we're actually undercutting ourselves by undercutting the possibility of a more effective diplomacy that will promise rewards for those powers that will stop fighting, that can pay for reconstruction, that can pay for not that Americans are going to do it all, but the point is we need money available, and we need money for our own infrastructure. So my view is that this 1.5 trillion that he's got has to be cut substantially, and it's just not going to be any real use for diplomacy. It's
Well,
really a
he's
myth.
meeting Xi, isn't he, in May?
Yes, that's right.
Martin.
Yes.
Yes, no, just a couple of additional points. Paul, as usual, have the same experience I always have when we have you on the show, which is fear, horror, alarm, not because I disagree with you, but because I agree with you on everything. And that's terrifying.
That is terrifying.
How do we get you into the? I mean, it wouldn't even work to have you talking to the Secretary of State because Marco Rubio might well listen to you on some of these issues, but the president and the people around him and Mr. Hegseth most certainly will not. And of course, as you
Yes.
know, that's the problem. But first, not so much a corrective as an update for you. The situation is even worse than Pele has said. Uh, Trump, first of all, went even further than Biden by, as you know, putting our defense budget over $1 trillion. Even Bush Jr. and Biden never did that before, and it's a new record. Then they openly admitted and boast of boosting it to $1.5 trillion, another half a trillion, not half a billion, another half $1 trillion put on board. And my friend, I think you're very familiar with him too, Winslow Wheeler, legendary Pentagon weapons and finance analyst. Wim has crunched the numbers on what they're doing, and he says no. It's going to be $2.5 trillion.
Yeah, well,
Not even
doesn't surprise me.
$1.5 trillion, not even $1 trillion, which was a world record in itself. It's totally metastasizing. It's totally farcical. It's totally out of control. So it's even worse.
Mm.
And if all this ridiculous theoretical money, which as Pele rightly said, and as you rightly say, we don't have, even if it was there to spend, which it is not, uh, because inflation will now simply go through the roof and wreck what's left of the dollar, and the world will turn to the yuan. Where else can it go? But apart from that, the more money they spend, the worse weapons they get. They get few and few weapons which don't even work for more and more money. That's the other insane paradox we're locked into. But I want to ask you a follow-up on another of your frightening insights and assessments. That is, you said, and alas, I fully agree with you again, this is worse, far more dangerous than the Cuban Missile Crisis, more dangerous than the Cold War. Explain to us and to our audience why that is so. What is more dangerous now than what we had then?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's very interesting. You know, the Cuban Missile Crisis was related to NATO expansion. Most people don't do the history, but when the U.S. put Greece and Turkey into NATO, this created a new flank for Russia, for the Soviet Union at the time, and Castro wanted to counter the flank of the southern flank, Turkey and Italy, where we were deploying missiles. We were deploying them throughout Western Europe as well as Turkey in particular, and that was one of the main reasons Khrushchev decided to deploy the missiles in Cuba. Now he didn't have that many he didn't have many intercontinental range missiles, so he needed something closer to the United States. This is why intermediate range missiles, like he deployed in Cuba, are war-fighting weapons. The theory is you hold your long-range intercontinental missiles on reserve, and you fight with your intermediate range. And that's exactly what we're seeing in Ukraine right now. And Ukraine itself is developing intermediate range missiles. And why didn't it have it? Because it had agreed to the START treaty, and it wasn't allowed to have intermediate range missiles until the end of the goal. And so now both the Russians weren't allowed either because we signed the INF treaty. And suddenly Ukraine is now developing these weapons, and Russia's having them, and then the Europeans are threatening to develop. So that's one front. That's an additional front of intermediate range missiles being aimed at Russia. And as I said, the Russians had done that to us in Cuba and scared the hell out of us. So that's one thing. And the same issue is occurring in the Philippines and in Guam, where we're also planning to deploy intermediate range missiles if we haven't already. So that's two fronts, both Russia and China covered, and Russia itself, from my understanding, whether or not it's propaganda or not, have targeted most of the sites throughout Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, as have the Chinese. So we have this behind the scenes buildup that nobody seems to be talking about. That, in my view, is more frightening than the Cuban Missile Crisis in the sense that it is really global and aimed at two major powers and not just one. With the problem, and Iran's in there too. Our nuclear war planning now, for the first time in its history since 2 years since Biden. Is the SIOP, the Strategic Integrated Operations Plans, hits Russia, China, North Korea, and now this year Iran. So we have a multiple warfront strategy that, in my view, any little crack, any little explosion in one region could bring all of them into play. And that's why it's more dangerous.
Well, I just
The
going to
other
say
reason it's more dangerous
about
is because there was actually a rationality in the Cold War. There was something, the two sides, the Russians and Americans, kind of understood each other's quest for power and inequality in power.
I
That
mean, the
quest is no
Cuba war
longer there.
was Cuba threat was Americans were prepared to bomb the Cuban sites just on the threat that Cuba's those missiles represented. But the Americans and the British have actually contributed to the firing of actual missiles into the Russian heartland. So it's as if
Exactly.
it's as if missiles were actually fired off from Cuba into the American heartland, and then expecting nothing to happen, you know. But of course,
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
yeah.
And this is where this idea of deterrence has become farcical because you have these new technologies. Drones are going to make war perpetual because they're so cheap. And so while we had this idea of deterrence as this thing where we stop some big nuclear war from happening because both sides had these intercontinental ballistic missiles, these lesser range missiles, the intermediate range, and drones in particular are the formula for perpetual war. So, and I agree with you that the fact that we are shooting these weapons into hitting Russia. I mean, when the Ukraine supposedly was aiming at Putin's dacha in the south with several number of cruise missiles, he struck back on the Polish border, near the Polish border, just to give us a warning as to what could happen next. And
It's like missiles are reaching the White House from Cuba, you know, and possibly
yeah,
planned
yeah, well,
by
they
Khrushchev.
could have.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Just
No,
one
they
question
had the
before
range. Yeah.
I just want to say before Martin, um,
Sure.
Larry Johnson, who's been on our show and is a very well-known podcaster. He said that his sources in the Pentagon said that there was a showdown, a sort of Dr. Strangelove type showdown at the weekend where Trump wanted the nuclear codes, and then the chief of staff Daniel Kane, is it, stormed out of
Kane.
the room. And I don't know if that's a psyops, whether it's a misinformation meant to scare the Iranians, you know, the madman theory. Trump seems like a lunatic, or Trump really is going off the rails.
Yes.
Yeah, what do you think, Martin?
No
Yeah.
question about it. He's going off the rails. They don't have the sophistication to pull off that kind of bluff, and they're too stupid to even try it right now. He's going off the rails. No question.
What do you think, Hall?
I tend to agree.
Have you heard
I
it?
think
Yeah.
the madman theory, Nixon was very calculating when he flew his
Yes.
B-52s into China, and he made it clear what he was doing it for.
Mm.
In Trump's case, he doesn't make it clear. And when he played this fire and fury with North Korea, it turned out to be a disaster. He just played it entirely wrong, and is all it's if he does it, tries the same thing now. I mean, he claims that she will be too afraid of him because they were apparently eating dessert or something, and Trump launched the missiles to strike Syria back in his first term. And therefore, Trump says, well, he's afraid of me because he knows I'm mad. I'm not so sure they think like that, the Chinese or the Russians. They've dealt with this so-called mad Americans before, and I really don't think they're going to be deterred or angered by them. Let me say one thing I brought out that nobody, to my knowledge, has said. Before with China. In North Korea, when they invaded North Korea, General MacArthur said they'd never do it. And this is what Trump just said. He said they would never invade Taiwan. Well, they did do it. And the nuclear threats didn't work. But what was more real and what is not talked about is the heavy use of napalm during the North Korean War, which was devastating. And the Chinese still penetrated deep into South Korea until the U.S. UN forces forced them back. So the idea that these nuclear threats are going to be deterrents at least didn't prove to be true in the case of the Korean War. And I could argue that they probably aren't true for in other situations as well. So if you don't have the proper diplomacy and begin to negotiate, really, first of all, secretly, it has to be secretly at first, but the way Trump says, all media, it's not
Exactly.
prepared diplomacy. When he went to North Korea, he didn't have a prepared diplomacy. And he needs a prepared diplomacy to deal with Iran right now. And one with Russia, the same. And China
I mean, he talks about being a deal maker, but as I understand, he places ultimatums and threats, and then his idea of
That
diplomacy
is
is
correct.
backing down or changing subject or something. I mean, it's really weird, isn't it?
No, that's my point. There's no real calc. The State Department had all sorts of plans for Iraq after the war. I mean, I was against the war, of course, but I thought that was a stupid decision, the Bush
Agreed.
part, 2003 war. But at least the State Department had a whole plan of what to do. They just ignored it, and they went on. So Trump, like many leaders, American presidents, isn't listening to their own people, and he's cutting the State Department and everything else. So when you get these very rational plans and try to outline how to deal with these situations, he's just not listening as far as I can tell.
Agreed.
Yeah, we got this 80-year-old man who can't remember things. It's incredible. We had this total mismatch. I mean, the nuclear button. I mean, it's not original. That I'm saying it, but it's worth remembering that. Um, I mean, I thought, well, if because there was some discussion on X after this apparent revelation that that Trump has threatened to use the nuclear codes. I'm not quite sure what that means. That it was planning a strike, or that he was just planning it was just a warning or something, whatever it was. But the point is,
No,
if Trump wants to nuke the world, he can. Can anyone stop him? Citing the legislation, will anyone stop him? I mean, he's only an old man, a feeble old man. All they have to do is push him over, and the world is saved. Or lock him in the bathroom or something. I mean, you know, what
Well,
do you think, Martin?
I'll let Martin answer that one.
uh, the mechanism, the legal mechanism exists. There is no
Yeah,
problem with the legal mechanism, the 25th Amendment, but the
yeah,
vice president would have to activate it. And the vice president, even if he tried to activate it, would be taken out by the president's loyalists immediately because he's isolated in the administration.
yeah.
What we really need is pub, massive public demonstrations, and as only the starter, and hundreds of thousands of people bombarding the performing puppets and baboons who pass for our Congress in both the House and the Senate. They respond to their own public opinion quickly enough. They are
Mhm.
there because they are institutional cowards. If all the people who they listen to were to listen to us and call their representatives and senators immediately, and also personally bombard and pressurize at every social event all the media makers and moguls. Of course, they isolate themselves and their own elites in the New York Times, in PBS, in CNN, etc. They don't listen to us, not just you and me, obviously, Pele, or to, as you know, to you, Hall. They don't listen to Colonel Larry Johnson. They don't listen to Colonel Doug McGregor. These men should be sitting in this, Colonel Dan Davis. There are so many others. Colonel Earl Rasmussen. General Randy George, a four-star general, Army Chief of Staff, as you know, has just been fired because he stood up to Trump. This fellow is like Hitler, who fired all his best generals. We're not even talking the moral issue now. We're talking Hitler's utter lack of competence from 1942 onwards. He had conquered Europe, he'd smashed the Soviet Union, and then he throws it all away. And all the most successful generals he has, he fires. So Trump is isolating himself that way. And you're right, Pele. It takes just one or two people to start up and start knocking the dominoes over. But nobody is doing that. We are. I laughed when friends warned me we were heading. Trump had set up a fascist top-down state because there hasn't been a repression of free speech, at least at our level, across America. But in terms of control of the government apparatus and the military, he has set up a fascist top-down state. And of course, other presidents from Clinton onwards have been systematically, remorselessly working towards this anyway. They'd be working towards this anyway. But now we see the price of it. There is nobody left to stand up and say, no, Mr. President, I won't do it. You're mad. We won't let you destroy the world. We will cut off your pinky finger before we will let you press that button. That is where we are at. But nobody in Washington is ready to stand up there and do it. Where is the Count von Stauffenberg? Not to kill the president, but just to stand up there and say lawfully, Mr. President, you're mad, you're senile, step down, you can't do it. The world is not your way. And one last point, and that is this conception of what is his conception of diplomacy. I've read his book, which was ghostwritten for him, but it reflects his fantasy thinking, The Art of the Deal.
Yeah, I read it.
Exactly, as you have warned all along, Hall. And when we first talked about this, I thought you were being excessively pessimistic about Trump. Alas, you understood him even then, as we both remember all too well. You were right and I was wrong. He thinks his fantasy version of deal making with half a dozen other corrupt, drunken moguls who may have come straight from old Epstein orgies. 50, maybe he didn't, but they did 15 years ago in New York or on Epstein Island. His conception of the art of the deal applies to world history and world power and global diplomacy. No, Mr. President, it does not. You have been living in la la land, and that's where you find yourself caught today.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Hall.
No, I just totally agree with that. The problem is we see the No King's Day and things like that. I don't live in the U.S. anymore, so I don't see the effect of that. So I hope it has had some effect, but he just kind of left it all off.
Well, the Democrats to be in terribly poor shape, aren't they? That's the problem.
And there's no Democrat. I mean, Kamala Harris was a joke. Biden should have stepped down earlier and picked a decent candidate. But you have this tradition where vice presidents become the next president candidate. I'm, by the way, for a single-term presidency. Jimmy Carter pushed for that. Woodrow Wilson talked about it but didn't do it.
And an upper age limit.
That would have solved this whole problem of
IQ
Trump,
test for people with their fingers on the nuclear button.
Or an age limit, too. Age limit, too. Well, that's a whole thing about the farce of the Constitution. And you're supposed to have what the electors are supposed to actually choose the president based on qualifications. If he doesn't meet those qualifications, he's not supposed to be president. Where were the electors when Trump, who had no public experience, doing anything? No, it's not even what the American Constitution said it should be. So anyway, my point is, look at his heroes. General MacArthur is one of his heroes. As I just mentioned, MacArthur had all these threats to block, said China would no ever because he was too tough, and China came in. This peace through strength notion, which dates from the Korean War, not from, dates from, and then Reagan picks up on it.
Wait a minute, are you saying Trump admires MacArthur? Because MacArthur would have, if it had been up to him, I mean, he was just a marshal in Korea. Obviously, he's America's Pacific War's most famous general and a hero for many Americans, the liberator of the Philippines, I think. But I mean, he would have nuked China, right? If Truman had said no.
He threatened to. I mean, you should see the statement. They were going to put, I don't know how many bombs of cobalt to prevent the Chinese. It was going to be a radioactive containment belt of cobalt bombs.
So that was Trump's. That's Trump's hero. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah, that was Trump's heroes, MacArthur. Wow. And what I'm saying here is those threats of nuclear war, plus the actual use of napalm, did nothing to prevent the Chinese from entering into South Korea. They crossed the Yalu River and almost took over the whole peninsula, but then they were beaten back to the dividing line that exists now. And so if you actually go back to where this peace through strength notion came from, you realize that it failed. It failed miserably. Now, under Ronald Reagan, it looked like it succeeded, and but it only did because we were lucky. The Able Archer exercises, combined with NATO's deployment of cruise and Pershing missiles in Europe, didn't blow up into a nuclear holocaust. NATO realized it was provoking the Russians and just stopped doing that. But then. There are other incidences that were very close to creating.
Martin, we got 2 minutes left. What do you want to say?
Well, just a clarifier, but a valuable point. You raise yet another one, Hall, and it's this. I covered and had superb sources in London and Paris, as well as Washington, during the deployment of the Pershing IIs. Right. President Reagan never looked upon the Pershing IIs as weapons to destroy or dismantle the Soviet Union. They were looked on as defensive counters to the deployment of the Soviet the intermediate range SS missiles, which were going to pulverize Western Europe. And for that, they worked. All along, Reagan wanted to have the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty of 1987. And I was there for the signing of it, 1987 INF Treaty. I was actually present at the creation of that. But that's the point. Those intermediate missiles were meant as counters for peace, which Reagan withdrew from the board as soon as Gorbachev backed down from the threat of the Pershings.
There was a
It
rationality.
balancing act. Exactly. By contrast, as you say, putting the missiles, firing them into Russia, deploying them in Ukraine, this is not a balancing act. This is madness. This is the mad gallop into World War III. There is no strategy to this at all. Hegseth and Trump are both, I thought better of Trump, but no, you are absolutely right. This is not rational theory. This is sheer infantile insanity.
I'm afraid we've got to end up there, gentlemen. So two contrasting shows for you viewers. One totally optimistic. I guess if you want to sleep well, you should watch yesterday's show and not watch today's. But it's better to be wise than a pessimistic or whatever, so that you can actually prevent these things from happening. Well, Hall, you've got to come on again soon. And
yes, please soon.
Anytime.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, gentlemen. See you tomorrow.
Thank you, Hall. Bless you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.